Now, US pride aside, you all know my feelings on American exceptionalism. We're certainly not the greatest. We are in fact lagging in pretty much everything besides military spending. Actually, I take that back. We're also the only country in the Western industrialized world that still kills people in order to prove how wrong it is to kill people. Yep, the death penalty is and has been growing strong in the US since but a brief 10-year moratorium ending in January 1977 with the death of Gary Gilmore via firing squad. Yeah, a firing squad. Apparently Obama isn't the only one who's good at killing people. But what's sick is we actually seem to enjoy it. There's no fucking reason that we should still have the death penalty besides the fact that we just feel like it. And because that's just how we do things. An argument that was actually used by Justice Alito in the most recent Supreme Court case dealing with lethal injections. And I'll get to that case in a minute, but first, let's just list 5 reasons why the death penalty holds no place in modern society. First off, it doesn't work, both in terms of a deterrent and an administration, as we shall see. The murder rate in non-death penalty states, of which there are 19, is consistently lower than those with the death penalty. Secondly, it's racist. And not just in the way that you'd think. In the vast majority of cases, a full 77% were given the death penalty when the victim was white, compared to only 15% African American victims and 6% Hispanic. And on top of that, African Americans are 3 times as likely as white defendants to receive the death penalty when the victim is white. Yay, justice. Thirdly, it fucks up. Yeah, imagine that. In a crooked justice system, innocent people end up behind bars, and death row is no exception. Since 1976, 151 people have been released from death row due to unavoidable evidence of their innocence. And as a recent U.S. death row study showed, 4% of defendants waiting to be executed are innocent. That may not sound like a lot, but it amounts to about 200 people. And this is just today. Imagine how many of the people put to death since 1976 have actually been innocent. Fourth, it costs more. Now, it may seem morbid to consider the price of someone's life, but this is an argument that comes up a lot with capital punishment supporters. So let's take a look. Cases without the death penalty cost an average of $740,000, while cases with the death penalty cost an average of $1.26 million. And maintaining each death row inmate costs about $90,000 more a year than a prisoner in the general population. Why? Well, mostly because of legal costs. It simply costs more money to seek the death penalty. Everything from more intensive jury selection, trials, and the appeals process to the added security and practices such as solitary confinement and on death row. And finally, it's just fucking inhumane. And I understand this fifth argument draws upon the concept of morals and ethics, but even setting aside the eye for an eye makes a whole world blind argument, killing someone is one thing, but torturing them to death is another. Which brings us back to this most recent Supreme Court case where the court ruled last week that lethal injection is A-okay. What was basically up for debate was whether a certain drug in the lethal injection cocktail violated prisoners' Eighth Amendment rights concerning a torturous, agonizing death. The issue of capital punishment itself wasn't even up for debate, although in his dissenting opinion, Justice Stephen Breyer wrote that the death penalty, in and of itself, now likely constitutes a legally prohibited, cruel, and unusual punishment. Regardless of his dissent and the fact that supporting evidence was taken from drugs.com, a site that explicitly states its information is not intended for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, the Supreme Court voted 5-4 to continue the use of midazolam, a controversial drug for use in lethal injections, mostly because it doesn't fucking work. So, backstory. Lethal injections consist of a 3-part cocktail. The first part, formerly sodium thiopental, FYI doctors, I'm seriously sorry if I'm mispronouncing the shit out of these words. This was used to anesthetize the prisoner. The second drug induces paralysis. The second step in and of itself has sparked controversy as it was originally added to the cocktail simply to avoid having to see the patient suffer. Lovely. And the third, potassium chloride, stops the heart. Now this first drug, thank you, this first drug is particularly important because without it, the effects of the second and third drugs would be quote-unquote indisputably excruciating, akin to akin to being burned alive, a fact that was corroborated by Charles Warner 1 week before the court began hearing arguments. His last words were recorded as, "My body is on fire." So what about that first drug? Well, due to shortages of that first drug, states began using midazolam, an anti-anxiety drug supposed to make patients feel calm and sleepy, which in the case of being burned alive seems a bit like giving a Band-Aid to someone who's just been partially decapitated. Even the supplier of midazolam, Acorn, sent an urgent letter to the Oklahoma Attorney General stating that using midazolam in lethal injections is quote-unquote clearly contradictory to its intended FDA-approved use. This letter came after the now infamous execution of Clayton Lockett, whose botched execution became one of several catalysts for the lethal injection Supreme Court case. On April 29th of last year, Lockett was strapped to a gurney in Oklahoma and injected with the 3-part cocktail, beginning with midazolam. What followed was an excruciating ordeal lasting more than half an hour, where Lockett seized, writhed, moaned, bled, and attempted to speak, while doctors frantically tried to figure out what the fuck was going on. It was pretty obvious, though, that this man was neither unconscious nor unaware of any pain. And according to the Supreme Court, not only is this not a big deal, it's also not their problem. Yeah, according to them, it's actually up to the plaintiffs themselves to suggest better alternatives to the current cocktail. And while Justice Alito and Scalia agreed that midazolam isn't perfect, it's the best we have right now, so unless you animals in solitary confinement can think up anything better, deal with it. Furthermore, supporters Justice Alito and Scalia effectively blamed the work of activists for why this shit is the best we've got and why this case even landed on their benches in the first place, citing pressure on international suppliers from death penalty abolitionists that made it difficult to find that first pain-reducing drug. So therefore, it's also activists' fault that following this shortage in supply, even before Lockett, prisoners were executed, sometimes torturously, with drugs that were expired, adopted in secret, and or acquired in violation of federal law. Dear Alito, Scalia, you dumb fucks. Let me explain. First off, don't take your evidence from the medical equivalent of a Cosmos sex guide. And secondly, it's not a matter of supply shortages. It's a matter of purposeful torture. It's the fact that you want these people to suffer. How fucking easy would it be, for example, to inject them with a high dose of morphine? But no, that would be too easy. They wouldn't suffer. And god damn it, we want them to suffer. We want the death penalty because, Murica, don't cloak your disdain for the human race with some bullshit finger-pointing at people actually attempting to make the world better. Activists are not at fault. The system is at fault. As Amnesty International puts it, the death penalty is a symptom of a culture of violence, not a solution to it. Without any hesitation, Alito, Scalia, you corporatized, sadistic, sociopathic rejects, you have easily earned the Low-Life Scum Award of the Week.
You low-life scum.
For more information and to get involved in the fight against the death penalty with those damn activists, visit nodeathpenalty.org.